So I totally jumped the gun, and I can't believe I fell for it because I'm always really careful about what I hear in the news versus what's really going on. So yesterday I did a very kind of passionate video about what my reactions to what I heard in the news about what Trump said about the cause of autism. And again, I can't believe I fell for it because I know that whatever they put in the news, there's got to be another 1 or 2 hours behind it. And the news is very notorious about taking things out of context or just highlighting the one tiny sliver they want to and not talking about the rest. So thank you for my friend who brought this to my attention, that there was something more. I just totally should have known. So what I want to do today is I want to comment about the actual real announcement by President Trump. So I went and I searched the web. I found the entire speech. I watched the entire speech today, and actually I am very pleased. So first of all, one thing that I really loved that he said was something that I said years ago when my Joshua was little, and I noticed that he was great until like a certain point. He didn't have one of those overnight moments where he went from point A to Z like overnight. He did have more of a kind of a gradual type transition, but there was a marked difference between where he ended up and where he was the best baby. He did everything on time and everything. But then all of a sudden you have this change, and then you're waiting for the language, and then all of a sudden you have the no eye contact, and somewhere along the way you have all the tantrums, and everything just kind of escalates. And my point of view was, if he was fine and now he's not, something got administered, right? Like something got inside his body that is damaging his body. Now, that obviously is a very oversimplistic view of what is probably really happening. There could have been things, let's say, I acknowledge that that we are all seeing parts of the elephant, different parts of the elephant, and maybe very few of us are actually seeing the entire elephant at once. But I really saw, like I said, I saw these changes, but I really realized that when they are in the womb, or maybe even preconception, like some things are probably, some dominoes are getting stacked up. And maybe there's a certain point where the dominoes start. So imagine if you've seen those like gymnasiums where people like make these gigantic domino displays, and then you have one domino fall and it goes around, and you don't really notice it until after a while, and sometimes they have like this domino sets off like these other 5 domino trains, and then all of a sudden you start to really notice what's going on. And I think that's what's happening too. So they're before whatever happens, whether it's an overnight event, and we know usually that's like a vaccination or something very sudden, but otherwise when it's a little bit more gradual, dominoes can start to be falling before the symptoms are, before you really start to notice it, right? So before the symptoms are evident, we could have dominoes falling in the background for years ahead of time, right? That's basically what dementia is, right? In dementia, the dominoes are falling 30 years ahead. Cancer, dominoes are starting to fall 30 years ahead before the actual symptoms are severe enough the biological pathways are messed up enough before the symptoms occur. I did like how he said, like he did say, President Trump, that means that you're taking something. So again, I think you're taking something with a faulty system or with something going on, and that combination for sure, it can be very explosive. And I do want to point out again what he said too is about the statistics. Right now, it's people are a little bit more aware. Before my son was born, it was like that 1 in 10,000, and it kind of grew, and now I want you to really realize 80% of the autistic children are boys. And the reason for that, the researchers believe, the reason for that is because testosterone is aggravating and estrogen is protective of the neural system, especially when, let's say they've done studies where they take mercury and they put mercury on a neuron and like what it does, and testosterone aggravates it, and estrogen can be protective. And so that's why you see this disparity between boys and girls. So when you hear 1 in 31 overall of autism, that's 1 in 31 boys and girls, but most of them are boys. So if you just extrapolate out all the girls, it's like 1 in 12, or it's a horrific amount. I had been following Stephanie Seneff for a very long time, and she had always been saying I think for a while, it was like by 2025, or maybe it's 2030, that at the trajectory that it's going, because math doesn't necessarily lie, if you don't do anything to change it and you just let it go the way it's going, it's going to be 1 in 2 boys by, I don't know, 1 in 2030, 2035. So that's why it's so important that we got to turn this ship around. So my overall impression of the entire thing, I was very happy that it wasn't just President Trump speaking. It was President Trump and RFK and Dr. Oz and all the other doctors that he put into place. And also and even the parents, bringing the parents in. And I was also very pleased that they emphasize that they have selected the studies that they're going to do, because I know that there are so many people around the country who've been wanting to do studies for a long time, but the way that everything was, the way it worked, and it cost millions and millions of dollars to do a study, and of course the FDA or whoever it was isn't going to provide that kind of funding. So it's great that they're saying, here's the funding, we need to expedite it, we're going to do the studies. We have so many people around the country that are already, we're kind of jumping out of their seat, like going, okay, we're ready, like we know what we want to study. So that is going to be great. I also loved that he said, what did he say? Oh, he emphasized the fact about spreading out the vaccines. So right now, I think it's very prudent of them, whether or not you agree with vaccines or not, that they take the time, they get all the studies, and they figure out what it is. So at this moment, the very wise recommendations that I have known since, well, I wish I would have known when my kids were born, but I knew, let's say once they were about 5 or so, the MMR shot should be separated. Okay, that's kind of a given, that the MMR, you should be able to separate that out. You don't need to put it all together. And smartly delaying the vaccines, who is that doctor? I'm so sorry, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He's Dr. Thomas, maybe? He's been in the kind of around lately, but he wrote the family vaccine plan. Just look it up, and I think he might have made a second edition, but he had always been recommending, at the very least, just spread them out, start them later, wait until the immune system is on board, because whether it was the Hep B or whichever one vaccine you're going to do at birth, it doesn't even matter, because the immune system is not even developed at all, so they're all going to cause problems. And that's another one, the Hep B. Everybody's like I said, I was hoodwinked with the Hep B vaccine at birth, because my story was when I worked at a facility for developmentally disabled children. And I worked in the severe to profound unit, and we had biters. We were teenage to young 20s, so they were big, and we had a couple biters. Fortunately, I never got bit, but because of that, they wanted us to get the Hep B vaccine. Well, back in those days, this was in 1989, maybe, or something like that. I was kind of fresh out of high school. They had informed consent, I guess, because they had the whole list of all the side effects, and then we had to sign and if we wanted to get it. And I basically looked at all those and I go, nope, I think I'll cross that bridge when I get there. So I decided to not get the Hep B, but that kind of was in the back of my head. So I think that was the first seed. The second, and fortunately, when I was a baby, I had vaccinations, but back in the 70s, there weren't that many, so I didn't really have a laundry list. And I went out of the country, and I did do a couple for travel, because I went to Central America, so I did a few travel things. But then one of the clients that lived there, she was 12, she was the cutest little girl, but she had stunted growth and her language. She was the only one that talked in the unit. They were all nonverbal, so she was verbal. So we all loved her because we had somebody to talk to. But her issue was because she reacted to the DTaP vaccine, and so again, another big huge seed planted. So when my kids were born, I went to natural childbirth. We had our whole birth plan. I put it in my birth plan, but my oldest son was born right after they initiated the Hep B at birth, and I didn't know that. It wasn't in my birth plan. They asked me right after I gave birth. They told me we're going to give the Hep B, and I said no, and then they wanted me to sign a huge, they had this big space for an explanation of why, and I could not think straight, and so I just said fine. And what happened was I didn't understand well enough why I didn't want it. I just kind of knew that there might be problems, but I didn't understand why it could cause problems. I didn't understand about maybe the aluminum or the mercury or whatever that's in the vaccine that could be stimulating the immune. I didn't know any of that. So to me, it was just stuff in the body, all or none, and so we fully vaccinated. So the Hep B at birth just doesn't make sense. The only person that really needs it is if the mother is positive, and then the baby would probably need it for that. So, and even so, I don't know. I'm not sure if they would even need it right away or if they could delay it until their immune system kicks in. I have no idea. So, but obviously that's a super small percentage of people. The one thing they mentioned is like, okay, so I know, I do appreciate the fact that he was pressing on the whole Tylenol thing. I do believe that Tylenol is harmful because it hurts your liver pathway, or your liver and your detox pathway. And Cuba probably doesn't have Tylenol because they don't have a lot of things. But what I've also heard, and I haven't been to Cuba and I haven't verified this for myself, but I also heard that they don't vaccinate either. Or they don't, maybe they have one or two, but they don't have the type of vaccine schedule that we do. I know that I think Nicaragua and Colombia, like they had like zero issues, and until we started, like we as a nation went over there and gave them our vaccine schedule, and that's when all their problems come. So we still have a lot. It's all about, let's not still blame. So if you watch my yesterday video, I did say we don't want to be blaming any one thing, because it's all about pathways and what's going on in the body and what things could be blocking or changing those pathways. Now, the big thing that my friend, I'm so glad that she came out and she was saying, so what did you think about this? The medication that they are talking about is basically a prescription form of folinic acid. And when because I didn't recognize the name of the medication, and I think it's like leucovorin or something. I looked it up, and as soon as they said folinic acid, I'm like, oh yes, that's a really big thing. Because I remember back in, gosh, I think it was like 2016, I took this course. This is one of the 4 books of notes that I took. There's literally 4 binders of these. This is an autism mastery course that I took for my sons. At the time, they used to call them Dan doctors, so they defeat autism now. So we were in San Diego. He was in San Diego. He is now in Oregon, but he does a lot of work for the Great Plains Lab. But he had this course, and I, as a growing practitioner and mom, took this course, and there was a whole module on folinic acid and cerebral folate deficiency. And I remember at the time, it was pretty experimental. Like you can get folinic acid over the counter, like if you, probably through a practitioner account, and I have access to it. But probably in the doses that you would need it, you would need a prescription. But at the time, the only way to get the prescription was to get basically a spinal tap. All right, so to prove that you had cerebral folate deficiency, I think you had to have a spinal tap. And because most people aren't going to do that, especially for an autistic child who, if you've ever had a child with autism, like severe autism, and you've tried to take them to get their blood drawn, it's like bloody murder, and 5 people have to hold them down. So you're not going to do a spinal tap. So basically it was like, it's in the early stages. I never really forgot about it, but I've never looked back to see how the progress of that type of studies or where they were in the process. So it looks like obviously they progressed to a stage where now they're going to be able to mass produce. And at this moment, anybody on Medicaid and CHIP, which is most of our children, my son's 24, he's on Medicaid because once they hit 18, if they can be, they're their own person anyway, and they can be on Medicaid. So that's something that we can kind of look into. But it makes so much sense because so many of the spectrum kids, ADHD, autism, or whatever, they have MTHFR. I know we do. I didn't know that until just recently, within, let's say, a couple years ago. I didn't really pay much attention to like what MTHFR is. And I still, because I'm kind of learning a little bit about everything, I still don't have a complete 100% grasp on everything that MTHFR can do. But the F in the MTHFR is folate. And when you do have an MTHFR, you're not necessarily methylating. So your methylation cycles, what's happening inside the cell, is not working right. And so they'll suggest to you to have methyl B12 and methylfolate. Folic acid by itself, if you have MTHFR, folic acid can be really detrimental. And what are they asking all the parents to do? So see, they didn't talk about this, but what are they asking all the parents to do in the prenatal vitamins was to take folic acid. So folic acid, we know that if there is a folic acid deficiency, I think that causes, if I'm not misspeaking, that's like partly what can cause a cleft palate and different things like that. Or so your body needs it, but it needs it in the form that it can use it. And so methylfolate is the next best form, and then folinic acid is the next best form. And if you need it severe enough, where what they're saying is that your brain has antibodies to the folic acid receptors, to folate receptors. I forgot how he said that, but you are, what is it saying? It says, I actually wrote a note on this because I didn't want to, it says reaction to a folate receptor on the brain, not allowing the folate to get into the brain cell. So it is a big deal. So is this like the only thing? No, he said about 60% of the kids with autism. So we know it's not the only pathway, but I'm confident now. This is what I was believing until I just heard that little snippet yesterday, and then I let my emotions carry me away. But I was believing that they were looking at they had so many different researchers around the US, around the globe, that kind of are all seeing the parts of the elephant, and now we're going to try to get them all together so we can see the entire elephant. And I think that's how we want to view it. Pretty much, this is the way I wanted it to go, and it's totally on me that I reacted to what I heard about the Tylenol without looking into the entire thing, because I could have had this commentary yesterday, but maybe if I get some comments out of it, it'll help boost my algorithm. So anyway, I will keep you posted, and if you have any questions, just reach out, and I will be looking more deeply into the whole folinic acid thing. That is really exciting, and because I know that we do have an MTHFR issue, that might be something that we will look into. Now that he is so much older, I have no idea what it will do, but like I said, it's not going to be harmful. Usually your B vitamins, if you take too many, or your water-soluble vitamins, if your body doesn't need it, it'll just flush it out. But I'll look more into what the medication is to make sure there's nothing added to it, because you don't want anything to be added to it. You just want it to be the vitamin all by by itself. You don't want it to have something added to it where it's not necessary. But anyway, I will see you later. I apologize, but hopefully this was a little bit clearer. Okay, bye-bye.